Baroness Browning.
Thank you. The great repeal bill, how do you see the devolved legislatures playing their role in this? Will they need to legislate in parallel, or would it be sufficient for them to indicate their assent by something like a legislative consent motion? And what happens if there is no consent forthcoming on certain matters, or the whole bill?
I have to, when I looked at your list of possible questions that I might be asked today, this is the one that I had to give most thought to, I have to say. Having had the tortuous experience of discussing these legislative consent motions on a regular basis back in my years as a minister, they were always difficult decisions, and that balancing act between the right thing to do and what you can actually achieve politically in the Scottish Parliament is always there. I think there's a very real potential, particularly if the Scottish Parliament has asked for a second independence referendum and the UK government has said no or not yet. I think there's a very real possibility that the Scottish Parliament in its current make-up might then use the legislative consent motion process, or even a great repeal bill in the Scottish Parliament, as given the deadlines we're all trying to work towards here, as a challenge to the UK government in all of this, and perhaps understandably do that if they have the opportunity to do so. I can see why they would maybe want to do so, and so I come back to my original statement really here, because I think if there is not clarity and transparency in the negotiations, which exposes both sides to full accountability in the positions that they are adopting between the UK government and the Scottish government, and if there is not some process of adjudication on some of those issues about powers that might then arise, then I think we will find ourselves in 12, 18 months' time facing the prospect of the Scottish Parliament and the UK Parliament disagreeing, challenges in the Supreme Court, and perhaps the whole timetable being derailed. So I would come back to the issue that we need to resolve how we're going to resolve these differences now, so that at the end of the day, if there is a great repeal bill in Scotland, perhaps coupled with some legislative consent motions, there might need to be both, then that has been agreed publicly and transparently, and nobody can then go back on the deal on either side.
Apart from the proposed referendum for independence, are there any other hot spots that you identify that might be the key sticking points?
Well, I think I am concerned about this issue of the impact that all of this has on the distinctive criminal and civil law in Scotland, and I based on the experience of the last 18 years, I am not convinced that with everything that they are facing, the UK government will be alert to all of the implications for the Scots criminal and civil law that they will need to take on board, and therefore it would be very, I think, very easy to see the possibility that at the end, towards the end of this process, a number of issues arise that have just simply not been thought through properly, and that comes back to the issue of capacity that was raised a minute ago. You know, I think in this process where this is not like a normal political process where you can just put it off for 6 months. You know, there's a deadline here, and these new laws will have to be passed. So scaling up the capacity right now needs attention at both ends of the M1. And having an adjudication mechanism and a transparency in the process, I think needs to be dealt with now, because if these issues arise in 12 months' time, it might be too late to resolve them properly. And I sat in the Scottish Parliament I was Finance Minister, I wasn't First Minister at the time, in August 1999. And we always talk about the first bill that was passed by the Scottish Parliament, the first act being the one that I put to Parliament to set up the financial rules and regulations, the Public Finance and Accountability Act. But actually the first act that was passed by the Scottish Parliament was a piece of emergency legislation that arose because a legal technicality had led to the release of a prisoner, if I remember rightly, who was deemed to be dangerous, and we had to act very quickly in order to fill that gap in the legislation. And I worry that if the Scottish legal provisions are not properly accounted for in these discussions, and there's a mix-up in the final month or so of the passing of the Great Repeal Bill, then there could be mistakes that could have quite serious consequences. So we need to get our act together on this.